What's up, everybody? This is the People Man Talks podcast, and I'm your host, Emanuel Solomon, the People Man, with Emanuel Solomon Training and Coaching. I'm an interpersonal skills coach that helps high-performing professionals of color to promote and reposition through increasing their cultural, emotional intelligence. I have a passion for working with professionals of color, helping them to reach their greatest potential, while at the same time dismantling systems of whiteness that render people of color paralyzed, neutralized, and mesmerized in the process. So you can go to my website, emmanuelsolomon.com, to get more information, more content, more resources. And if you go to my website right now, I've got a free gift for you. And I said free, a free gift for you, a free training, free interpersonal skills training. If you go to EmanuelSolomon.com, if you're a high-performing professional of color, go there and check me out there. This is the People Man Talks podcast, and I have a special guest with me today, a friend of mine, a deep thinker. His name is Sean Woodard, okay? He's an HR director for Multnomah Education. He has over 17 years of human resource experience. He's a leader, he's a deep thinker, and a human resources professional. Please, everybody, welcome Sean Woodard to the People Man Talks podcast. How you doing, bro?
Hey, man, I'm doing pretty good. Thanks a lot. And if you're not aware of your own motivations and your own triggers of happiness, triggers of frustration, you're not going to be successful. Because you are guaranteed to be put in a situation where people are going to be pushing your buttons regularly. And if you're not aware of that, you'll be wondering why you're so wound up all the time, going back to what you were saying earlier. You know, again, you could tell we've been talking for a little while. We're getting warmed up here. But, you know, my mother, who I just talked about, passed away when I was young. And that made me re-examine a lot of stuff. You know what I mean? I went through the angry teenager phase, but I can understand. That's how I started to learn who I am and get some mastery over my emotions. Because, you know, whether it's when you were in school and you know you were getting mistreated by teachers, and if every default reaction is, oh, I'm out of here, I'm out of this classroom, you lost out on your learning. And especially when people are doing it intentionally. So fast forward to the workplace. Oh, I'm out of here. You lost out on your ability to deliver value to constituent groups or income to yourself and to your family. So understanding that kind of stuff and getting a mastery over that so people can't trigger you or can't get you off your game is critical. I don't know what to tell people. Read your authors. We were talking about mentors. Mentors come in all shapes and sizes, you know, because if you grow up in most Black communities, you could and should have mentors all along the spectrum. You know, I've got mentors who are far more successful than I am. Mentors of color, Black folks, far more successful than I am on an economic scale or what they're responsible for, leadership, things like that. And I've got some mentors that are older than me and still making minimum wage, but they are wise beyond their years. They're not pursuing the dollar. They're not pursuing their career ladder. And they're just super wise people. And you're fortunate every time you get to sit down and talk, you know. And in our community, and these become archetypes. But, you know, it's the barber who's been cutting hair for 30 years. You know, you go sit in that chair, you walk out with a lesson and a haircut.
You do.
You know, you go to the restaurant where you know, she's been cooking for 30 years, you're getting a meal and a lesson. And you got to stay plugged into that. It's not always just the career professionals, although you should have the career professionals. But you got to listen to people who grew up, who understand identity, understand Blackness at a PhD level. and just give it to you in a different kind of way, in a different kind of context that you can't get in a professional setting.
What you're talking about, man, is that's part of us. You know, even though we talk about Africans aren't monolithic, that's part of us. Is that respect and that understanding for our um, our elders, our ancestors, those who have came before us, and a lot of that has been taken from us and has been shed from us, and the value of that has been diminished. That value on, and I'm glad you said that, because the value of the dollar, and I will tell you this, the value of the dollar is important. You need money to survive in this, at least in this economy, in this climate. I don't recommend not making money, but the value that you get from your life is not only expressed through monetary means. And what you're talking about is a wisdom of self, a wisdom of culture, a knowledge and an understanding that once you can attain that, it can do wonders for your physical health, for your mental health, you're like, oh man, she just told me something that just changed my life while serving me food. And the thing is, some of these environments, some of these whitened environments do not value this. And that is why, when a lot of black and brown folks that have that real warmth, that want to kind of break down some of those stupid barriers to being able to say, hey man, how's it going? And that warmth that we have, that's part of who we are. That's a superpower.
Yeah.
And
And
when it continues to get stripped away, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, we start to go into a cocoon, and we start to harden. And until we're able to really express who we are, we're toxic to ourselves. It doesn't go anywhere but stays inside. And so um, people have tried to do the advocacy groups, the affinity groups, to try to kind of give black folks a little bit of that, but it's not enough. It's not enough.
yeah,
That once a month retreat, that 2 weeks a year, whatever. I think that's one reason why, getting a coach is really important, that knows what you're going through, so you can plan for this and have somebody who's there regularly with you, that can kind of help you navigate on a regular basis.
yeah. And then it's just one thing, I'm gonna flex on one thing you said, like it stays inside. I don't think it's inside, and it just starts to infect other people around you.
Mm,
That toxicity, that
mm,
toxic negativity.
mhm.
Once you start suppressing things and experiencing things in your body, it is going to come outside. It does affect your primary relationships. So if you're in a relationship with another person, that toxicity is coming out. If you have kids, that toxicity is showing up. You can't be the best parent or the best partner in those kind of relationships. Forget about being the best employee, right? You can't just be the
Mhm.
best human that you could possibly want to be. But to your point, I think being open has to be one of the priorities. We are really guarded, and we are guarded for very good reasons.
Yeah.
And then we have to understand, when is it okay, or developing the skills to be both guarded and open at the same time. That, well, take you and me, for example. We met in a Starbucks,
Mhm.
right? And,
Mhm.
and the society has set it up to two black men. What's the odds that we're gonna conflict versus uniting, you know it with two strangers that just run into each other?
Right.
Sometimes it's a coin flip. It's a 50-50 coin flip, whether we're gonna conflict with one another, or whether we're gonna unite, whether we're gonna compete or collaborate,
Mm,
right?
mm.
And your level of openness, and I like to believe my level of openness, allowed us to collaborate.
And
And then
have
we
a
start,
relationship and start a
yeah,
relationship.
we start with a simple
Yeah.
hello.
Mm-hmm.
How's it going? I start recognizing you, start recognizing me. We start saying hello, and we sit down and have a conversation and realize, oh, this brother's really dynamic. And then here we are today, and, trying to expand our sphere of influence and continue to build a relationship. You know, that's a difficult proposition right now for lots of reasons, you know, and this is why I talk about like mentors. Another thing is about reading and studying. We love to study our past, but we got to study our past and try to implement what we learn from studying our past, right? Things like we know about Black Wall Street, like people know about Black Wall Street. You could watch the movies, you could watch the documentary, Rosewood, you could read, you could do, but take those principles on how Blacks build a community, even in a commerce and in a community with one another. And we always struggle with, do we really believe that we can replicate that in 2020 or 2021 or 2025? We know about all the systemic stuff, the gentrification, the redlining, all that kind of stuff. But on an interpersonal level, there's no barriers there. There's no systemic barriers to people being open to one another and building that collaboration and building your network and strengthening yourself. Because then you start to have the connections with people to learn. Because I'm gonna give you credit real quick. I'm gonna let you jump in here. What you're doing with the podcast, right? You're bringing all these people together. I've seen your lineup. I've watched a couple. I need to watch the rest of them. I want to do that. But it shows not only that these are people right here in the community. These are talented, intelligent, grounded people right here in the community.
Mm-hmm.
But you can have these kinds of relationships if you're open to doing them.
Mm-hmm.
You have this openness. It's our community. Forget about work for a second. Our community doesn't have to be in competition with each other with the way we are in competition with each other right now. And I'm talking about nationally.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to figure out how to dismantle this competitiveness amongst ourselves.
Right.
And get more into a collaborative space like we used to be, right? So I talked about Black Tulsa. I told you about my Black Panther roots. But there were times where we were far more united than what we are now. We will unite around causes and around incidences, but we have this competitiveness that we've got to dismantle. You know what I mean? We've got to figure that part out. And,
Or
I could just rant on that for a while, but that's kind of one of the big.
Or we could create, you know how like when you're about to try to improve your health in some way, right? Rather than thinking of it as like, I gotta lose 30 pounds, we change the focus to, we're gonna start living an active lifestyle, right? So maybe we could take the same thing with this situation, which is like, maybe not worrying as much about being so competitive, but how do we uplift our people and focusing on uplifting our people and being excited about others' accomplishments. Now, this is a process because human nature, part of human nature is to be jealous sometimes. And I'll admit that I've been jealous sometimes for other people's accomplishments and successes. And I've had to look at myself and acknowledge that, and but also not judge myself or condemn myself for that, because a feeling is not who I am. A feeling is a temporary ideal or emotion that comes, and we have many of those. So if we can focus on like uplifting Black folks, Black and brown folks, and helping them and showing them like, you are dope, you are fly, you are fresh. I can't wait to talk to you again because I recognize those things in you that are tight, and it doesn't diminish from me. If we can come to that point, or just maybe start a habit of acknowledgement. Like just a habit of, yo, this dude Sean, he's been in this industry for a long time. I'm telling you, if you talk to him for just 10 minutes, he can give you something that's going to really help you. And then that just kind of pushing, creating that amongst each other as like a reciprocity type joint. I think that would really help.
Yeah, and it's always good to acknowledge what is happening, right? Because we know it's happening. I think we are doing a good job with our kids. I know a lot of people working to uplift our kids, right? Our Black and brown kids out there,
Mm-hmm.
in a variety of ways. I wish that got publicized more, but we're aware of it. Like our
Right.
local folks who become athletes and celebrities, entertain, they do a lot of good in the community. Just local business people, helping kids, helping one another. I know we do it in ways in different parts of the country. It may show up a little bit more. Black fraternities and sororities do a lot of organizations that are out there. So it's just good to give those people the recognition and the shout out, like you said, and professionals of color that are out there making it happen, organizations that are out there uplifting, making it happen, and just continue to connect. And certainly, like I said, continue to do what you're doing, continue to do it on an interpersonal level as well. Like, because it is a really good feeling. It's a good feeling to be in the grocery store, make eye contact with a person of color, and
they say what's up back, and you
it,
understand. You have this mutual understanding for just a few seconds.
just the instant. It goes a long way.
Yeah.
And certainly this goes further when you start getting down into tangible, tactical ways that you can progress as an individual and as a community. It goes further, but sometimes those little things, they matter. They matter a lot.
They do.
Certainly when you live in a predominantly white community, and like a Portland, Oregon, and you get that acknowledgement from your people, is a good feeling.
Can I talk about the science of that real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, so there was a study that was done, Stanford study that was done on the effects of emotion and the range of emotion. It actually, I'm gonna just paraphrase it, but basically, these different folks, these participants, had mood. They had mood. How do I call that? Trackers, right? And every few minutes they would indicate their mood by a color. And these groups were spread out, right? And they were tracked based off of their mood. And what they found out was that individuals' moods were influenced by others they were around. And okay, that makes sense, right? We understand that. Like, okay, somebody's happy, you can kind of feel the good energy, but it was bigger than that. It was like within half a mile, you had a like a 50 or 40% chance higher of being happy if you were within half a mile of other people that were happy, or So that study was also talked about on a more micro scale, right? Like they had folks in a room who didn't talk, and the person with the strongest emotional state influenced the other two without even saying a word. So what I'm saying is our emotion, and I've been talking about this, is our emotion travels. We're like, this is why people are so dynamic and we're so amazing. Like when you look at a bear, you hear a bear is smelling something from miles away. Our emotion travels like, like can travel miles away. Our thoughts can travel miles away and attract people in other places across the world and actually bring them closer to you. That law of attraction is real, man. And that those few seconds, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean that it's not happening. Those few seconds that that black or that brown person smiles at you, they affected your emotional state. That energy just transferred to you. And now your outlook is different. Now you can actually take some time and say, man, I was kind of, something was kind of weighing me down. I didn't even notice it. I didn't even have the awareness of that. But that guy that said something to me influenced my mood. And that's important, that we start to understand this. This is science. Not only is it just interpersonal, you can think of it scientifically, man. We're just touching the surface of the importance of emotion and the in energy. We're just touching it. And so like when you're talking about it and you're expressing it in the way that we do, which is just basically speaking of the actions that we took, but there's something going on behind the scenes as well, you know, these emotional states. And so it's important that we just, a little bit of kindness, man, a little bit of just a hair of kindness, man. It can change somebody's day, change somebody's life.
Yeah, it will also change your life, you know, being kind. And it's just one of those kinds of things. I appreciate the science of it. There's a lot of research that's out there for people to go research around, you know, how the brain releases chemicals in those same situations that you outlined. And, you know, just like smelling good food and, you know, seeing happy images will have a biochemical reaction in your brain that starts to affect your physical, you know, makeup. Just like how we all know stress has a negative impact, a physical negative impact on the body.
Mm-hmm.
You know, happiness has a positive impact on the body. You know, things like hugs and touches, and you could take this down the road as far as you want to go. And because I've been in a lot of these conversations with friends, you know, a lot of times we like to laugh it off and dismiss it until we remind ourselves about our history, right? So like so you emphasize the science, and I'm all about the science, right? We could encourage people to do the research. It's out there. But then when you bring in the spirituality of it, we get less um, doubtful about the spirituality as a community. There's plenty of us that we don't believe in the spirituality. That's fine. Go look at the science. Plenty of us that don't believe in the science. That's fine. We got a spiritual background. But like you said, being around happy people that's a block away or half a mile away is a real thing. You know, trees have roots and they speak to each other and they talk to each other, and the energy that transfers between objects and people and things like that sounds wonky until you remember our history, right? If we go back to Africa and think about us as Africans, it doesn't seem so far-fetched. It doesn't seem so far-fetched when you start studying it, right? Because we claim the mysteries of the pyramids as Egypt's and kings and queens, and spirituality, and the fact that we developed math before the Greeks. And you know, you learn your history and we start owning that. We start telling ourselves and our kids are kings and queens. But sometimes in the modern day, we dismiss the magic, the spirituality of it all. And I know there's movements to recapture that. Black girl magic, black boy magic, that sort of stuff. There's real applications to that line of believing. And we can't take that out of our identity
Or vocabulary.
Of our vocabulary and of our practice. Right? These should be daily practices. And the reason why I want to go back to social media, man, we could shift gears and I could hammer on that as just a negative source of information. It doesn't have to be completely that, but you got to be truly mindful of what you're taking in on a passive level, right? I choose not to do Instagram and Facebook. I've looked at it. I think I'm aware of it enough that there isn't enough intentionality around it in a positive space that I can advocate for it in context of in this conversation, right? Just simple. If I pull up 10 images of war and destruction, of death, it's going to have a physical and spiritual impact on me as a human. I'm taking that in to my sensors. I've taken that in. If I take up 10 images that are more positive and more uplifting, that's going to have an impact on me. And if people dismiss it, it's just very simple, right? I can put on Luther Vandross on a Sunday morning or the Commodores on a Sunday morning and the energy in my house transfers. Just like if I put on DMX in my house, the energy changes.
Really good.
The energy changes. If you can acknowledge that, then you just have to acknowledge that what you take in and what you hear is going to have some impact on your energy.
You got me doing my DMX on that.
I know I was going to get you on that one.
Nah, but
I know it.
That's important to be intentional about your mental, spiritual practice of limiting or maybe just filtering the images and the input that you have in your life, so that you can have a more positive outcomes. And I want to talk about this too, because we never got into, we only got a little bit into emotional regulation, but name some of those people skills, man, that you've learned along the way that kind of helped you to navigate your career and prosper.
I mean, let's just go with the senses, right? Like listening. Listening skills are super important, and pairing that up with your visual skills, right? So like understanding what's happening around you. And I think we are innately good at this, Black people, because we have to be. And I don't mean listening like just the act of hearing, but sentences and sentence structure and tone are super important. How someone says something to you is as important as what they're saying to you.
Right.
And a lot of times we get triggered and locked in on what is being said versus the how it's being said, right? And then you got to pair that up with what you're seeing. You got to read people's body language and whatnot to see if they're being consistent, if they're being authentic or not being authentic. That's the analysis of the external environment. Take all that in. None of this is passive. It's not a passive practice. It's an active practice, right? And then to have that internal dialogue in your head and to do constant assessments of the stimulation that you're getting in. Now, I know that this is a process, so it can sound tiring, but it really isn't once you get more developed into your process.
You start somewhere.
You have to start somewhere. You have to be aware of your environment, just like being able to hear yourself and be cognizant of yourself as you're communicating with someone else, particularly when they're different from you.
Listening creates that. There's actually a study that talks about that people who listen more, that influences how they speak. So they actually listen to themselves more. People that listen to others more, they also listen to themselves more. So they convey messages that are more direct and get to the senses better, because they're not moving in so many different tangents when they're direct in their message. So
Yep. And I think you leaned forward or backwards. Your lighting went dark on your face. Okay, now we're back.
There we go.
No, I think that's right. I think humans have an ability to mimic. Like the mimicking skills are really strong. As I think it's a human trait. I don't think it's necessarily particular to being Black or a person of color. I think it's a human trait that we do mimic. And you can see that again, like, if you can pick up the dictation and the intonation and the syntax of people that you're around, how you say a thing and what is meaningful and how it gets conveyed as meaningful is who we are. And that becomes cultural, or let's say even tribal, right? Which is really important. If you're a part of a tribe, you listen and you start mimicking the ways of your tribe. And if you're just lost, you're not doing that. Or if your tribe is taking on sort of kind of negative energy and negative practice, you're mimicking that. It
Mm-hmm.
all goes back to who are you around? These are things that we basically learned all of our lives.
Mirroring.
Sorry, yeah, mirroring, mimicking. It's all the things we've learned all of our lives. Why our parents used to say, don't hang around those people. Don't you hang around that boy.
You're gonna be
Don't you
one of
hang
them.
around that. They didn't want you picking up their traits.
Yeah.
They didn't want you picking up their ways. And we know this, right? If you hang around those people, you're going to end up imitating and taking on their behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And if their behaviors and if their ways aren't positive, they're going to become your ways,
Mm-hmm.
which is all what we're saying. Surround yourself with good people. Be a good person. Surround yourself with positive thinking people, people who are emotionally intelligent, you know, who have a human focus on things, who want to be kind, who want to be healthy, who want to progress in the career space. You surround yourself with those people, you're going to pick up those traits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you know, that's just important on a human level, right? So going back to your question around listening, seeing, being self-aware of what you're sounding, how you're conveying emotion,
Mm-hmm.
things
Reading.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then we're having this conversation. It's a great space to be in around being in the present, and then pulling all the way back to reflecting on yourself as a kindergartner, for example, right? There's a book out there, everything you needed to know you learned in kindergarten,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just this concept of, being good, treating yourself right, treating others right, you go bring in the golden rule if you want to, and all that stuff, and then bringing that into the adult professional space around humility, right, is a big character trait that I feel like gets promoted and encouraged in Black development, is around humility. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you grow up around your grandparents and your aunts and your uncles, I feel like we get taught, and I'd like to pose this as a question. I wish this was a big giant forum, but I feel like we get taught around being humble is a part of our identity. Also, so is confidence, and so is strength, and having a healthy relationship with all those traits
Mm-hmm.
are really important.
Mm-hmm.
Because you truly have to know that they're not in conflict with each other, that you can be confident and
Yeah.
you can be humble
Mm-hmm.
and not lose one for the other, right? And I think all those traits, when they go wrong, have negative outcomes, right? Like confidence can become arrogance and can become aggression, and
Right.
that could just be wrong. But confidence in and of itself isn't wrong. Humility can become weakness and passivity, which could be wrong in certain circumstances. But being humble isn't wrong in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So so those are the kinds of emotional intelligence pieces that I would promote, that I try to bring into my practice. That I like to be humble in the workspace, but I also like to be really confident. I know what I know. And yeah, I could probably go into being arrogant. I could probably go into being passive. That there are times where I feel like I'm right, you know. And then my job is to convince other people that not just I'm right. So here's where the marriage with humility comes in, because it's not about ego. It's not about Sean is right. It's about this is the right decision, bringing in all the factors, right?
Talk about that
So
a
it's
little bit more, because we need to know negotiation tactics and how you convey messages. That's one of the requests that a lot of my audience uh, have requested, and a lot of Black and brown folks have had issues with, is how to express themselves, how to get what they need from um, uh, what let me say this right, how to get what they need professionally through how they communicate. Like some of them are not being listened to by upper management. They're not being heard. And there's skills to that. What skills have you adopted. And I know you were going to get to that, but I want you to really focus on some of those things that you've done to get the ear and get people to kind of see things your way without telling them,
Yeah.
see it my way.
Let me get a textbook answer first.
Okay.
If you're talking about whiteness, right? And I hate to lump all people into one monolithic group, but let's just go with it. Professional spaces,
Mm-hmm.
whiteness, data, and fact-based data is the number one way to open up the door. Or certainly if you're trying to get people to see things your way, like what are the facts and the data? Like then you get back into like numbers crunching. You know, this is what I said, 4 out of 5 or 50% or 79% or $344,000 are at stake. Like that kind of data, it certainly can be questioned, but they're going to question the mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes less about the individual and it becomes more about the data that's on the table, right? So you can go with pure facts. Then you can go with anecdotal facts, which is around reporting. I talked to, who did you speak with? What information are you conveying, right? But this goes big in the professional spaces. We talk about people of color, especially when you talk about equity,
Okay.
right? Like if I say, I went and talked to 4 leaders of nonprofit agencies that do equity in the Portland, Northeast Portland community. That's leverage that I'm bringing to the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Now I could just go online and Google some stats and get graduation rates or economic disparity, or I can pull up laws around redlining and gentrification. I can bombard people with fact-based data, and I do. I gather data to show I know what I'm talking about, and it divorces me from the conversation. And then I can layer that with anecdotal reporting. I'm in touch with people who are doing the work. I'm in touch with people who are on the front lines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm in touch with community leaders, if you want to go with the equity space,
Yeah.
for example. Now you match that up with this, and then you go right back to what we were just talking about. If I do that in a non-egotistical way, I have a greater chance to succeed. Now, let's bring the blackness in. We typically speak with more articulation, more passion. It's just kind of like our upbringing. We're emotive people. Don't take that out. You want to convince someone of something, you better show some passion and some investment around what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm apologizing because I'm using very general stereotypes. I'm not saying white people are dispassionate and all Black people are passionate. I'm not saying any of that sort of stuff. But if you look at it big picture, generalities, typically white presentations are dispassionate, fact-based, right? And that has a strength and a weakness in the professional space, right? And people of color are often characterized, the presentations are more passionate and humanistic driven, anecdotal driven, and not as data driven. That's generalities. Now, when you blend them together, because if you're talking about things that are passionate to you, right? I'm in the education space. When you talk about kids of color not getting equal treatment or equal access to education, and the educational outcomes historically are negative towards Black kids, Black and brown kids, I'm going to get passionate about that.
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid to let my passion show up.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also I'm gonna be prepared to have the facts to support my passion.
Can I talk about that? Because
Yeah.
what you're talking about is one of the keys to emotional intelligence, which is the the emotional brain and the logical brain, and both of those have to be properly prepared for whatever information that you're going to convey. And so the emotional centers of the brain uh, they're stronger more power, right? And once you affect those parts of the brain through your communication, then when you add the facts, it's just that much more powerful, because
It,
both of those have to be ignited in order for you to make change and make movement. But at the same time, if you don't affect the emotional centers, you don't if you don't hit some of those areas that make you emotional or make the others emotional, then you'll also miss the mark. So I think what you talked about is that balance between both of them. Maybe not even a balance, but just making sure that both of those are in the picture when you're communicating to folks about what you feel you're trying to convince them of.
well, and the ultimate key is to know your audience, right? This is all this emotional intelligence stuff. You have to know who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And again, this is things I think we are actually very, very good at, right? So we call it code switching. You can kind of hold that equity term up there. I know it has a negative connotation around code switching, but let's just hold that for a second.
Okay.
But know your audience. Some people aren't ignited by those emotions. They're dispassionate people. And a lot of times leaders are rewarded for being dispassionate. They're just fact-based people. That's their calling card. That's how they promote themselves. That's why they get promoted. The higher up you go, a lot of times those emotions are factored out. You see it in politicians. They have to show emotion. They work hard to show emotion and make connectivity with people. But their brand of success is, I've got the data. They try to outdata you all the time, right? But you have to just know your audience. If you're in a room of 10 people, you should know who gets ignited by the emotion. Go back to interviewing, reading the room.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in an interview and you just meeting these people for the first time, you walked into a room, your brain did all sorts of assessments of the people in the room, they're assessing you. You're in an hour-long conversation. You got about 15 minutes to make these assessments of who's an emotional person, who's a fact-based person. You just have to be willing and able to toggle.
I argue that
No.
I only argue that we're all emotional. It's just what types of emotions that we show. I like that's one thing I try to make sure I let the audience know, is that everyone is emotional, and we have an emotional response before we have a logical response. It's just how our brain is connected. So a lot of people, they don't know what emotions are going on during the process of perception, but an emotional thing, something emotional is happening in the brain.
I don't disagree. I'm gonna jump. I don't disagree, but what activates that, right? So let's just say we all desire security
Mm-hmm.
and comfort,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, if I'm going to present to a leader, someone above me in the organization,
Mm-hmm.
and I know they need some kind of security and comfort in what I'm saying. They don't want uncertainty. I don't want it when people come to me. I want some confidence, some security, some comfort in what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to give it to me? It may what gives me comfort and security might be different than the next leader.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is, culturally, on a race level, it might be different from Black leader to white leader, but it might be different from man to woman. Their age, all the intersectionalities come into play, right? Around what's going to give someone comfort. It might be, hey, I did the analysis. I see a 4% difference in option A and option B. That might you're right, that might trigger their emotional comfort zone to say, let's go with that. Let's go with your idea. Versus, I talked to 7 people. They said they would be more comfortable with this. Some people, that gives them the security to move forward with your idea.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, I just like to cover all the bases. I want to have both in my pocket.
Exactly.
I want to do the analysis. But I also want to be able to say, I've had the conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And I think just understanding that, having the tools ready in the tool belt are essential. And if you haven't developed those tools, they're not sharp enough. And if you pull a wrench out that's not oiled, or a screwdriver that's halfway bent, it's not going to work for you. So sharpening your tools, your people skills is very important. So I want to ask you a couple questions, before we close, more about you as a person right now. um, uh, what is Sean Woodard learning about himself? What are you learning right now? Like, what, we're in Corona, we got crazy times, Mad Max is outside, what are you learning about yourself right now?
Man, that's a very good question. Um, it's a really good question, and I have to talk my way into an answer. I think it's it's been obvious to me that my ability to regulate myself is very critical right now
Mm.
because of the coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, I'm a father of 3 girls. I'm a husband.
Mm-hmm.
We're all in quarantine. I digest a lot of information about coronavirus on a regular basis, right? So I watch all sorts of news outlets. I'll read articles online. I'm trying to decipher and discern what's real, what isn't real, so I can best prepare myself and my family for the current environment and for the future environment. Like, nobody knows what 2 months are going to look like around here, 6 months are going to look like. All my kids are school aged. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Am I going to have a job? Are we going to be able to provide? What if the food supply chain gets busted up? What is the economic situation looking like? But I have to regulate myself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to allow myself to get up to this anxiety level where then I crack. I'm not as strong. I'm not as focused. I'm not as clear minded. I'm not as healthy. Because what's the most important thing is I got to be of sound mind and body so that I can be a parent, so that I can be a husband, and not base level, right? I'm trying to be up here with everything that I do. I want to be the best father I can be. I want to be the best husband I can possibly be, right? And they're going to need me to be happy and engaging and loving and still prepared.
Mm-hmm. Or whatever.
'Cause
Yeah.
my youngest is 6, my middle's 12, my oldest is 14. We're not foraging food in the woods. They want to go to the refrigerator and see that there's milk. You know what I'm trying to say? So it's my job to be focused and grounded so that I can continue to provide on the most fundamental levels, but also at that same emotional intelligence level. It all comes back to that. You have to be able to provide love to people, you know, at your core group first, your nucleus first. That's probably the most important thing. And, in this pandemic, locked in your house, you know, you got to generate that stuff. And Sean is learning how to regulate. And if I start to feel myself getting a little bit down and depressed by this scenario and a little bit too worried, I can check myself.
Mm-hmm.
I want to check myself pretty quick. And I want to have ability in a practice that if I need to reset, I need to have that. I need to have that ability. And the quicker I can reset, the better.
Because you got other people that are looking to you, for their needs. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I'm saying is, you got to know how to do that, right? So I'm glad you're allowing me this time because, you know, whether that's taking a walk, whether that's reading a book, whether that's watching a movie, whether that's listening to certain kinds of music,
Mm-hmm.
but you truly have to be aware of the things that you're doing them intentionally, and you're getting the results that you're trying to get. Because I'm human, but your body, when you get into that high anxiety mode, that depressed mode, that stress mode, it sends you right to the sugar. It sends you to the alcohol, it sends you to the sugar, it sends you to the low the lowest base level behaviors, because that's what the human body is programmed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to understand that if you're going to eat the cookies or whatever, is it getting you the results that you wanted? And you can immediately reset and say, no, I know why I'm eating this, because I'm eating it because my body has had a chemical reaction because of the stress level that I'm under, and it's causing me to desire more salt or more sugar.
Mm-hmm.
These are known things. So you got to put that cookie down and walk outside and get more fresh air, or interact with humans on any level that you are able to.
Mm-hmm.
Interact with nature, music, talk to your family, talk to good friends.
It's all
That will
emotional regulation. Yeah.
that will reset you. You keep using that phrase. It's a very good one, emotional regulation. But what I observe is that when people are triggered, they go into the base level behaviors, which is normal, but they're not quick, they're not aware of it, and they're not aware of it quick enough. I'm gonna talk about social media one more time. The act of scrolling,
Social media, y'all. No, I'm playing.
the, the act of scrolling, this ain't social media right here. So let me talk about it. The act of scrolling is probably related on a biochemical level to doing drugs, because you are getting those dopamine hits
Mm-hmm.
by scrolling.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting that instant reinforcement and that instant gratification. Certainly if you post something and you get likes and you get comments,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully everybody's well aware of the studies that have taken place of how that does release the dopamine chemicals in your brain that gives you that reward.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't have the same level of sustainability as like a hug or the loving compliment that you get from a loving relative, from a child, or from a parent. So my kids can go on Instagram and I know that they're getting a reinforcement from that. But I also understand that that reinforcement that they're getting pales to the reinforcement that I give them or that they give me. So if we are going down into that, we need to just be aware if we're doing it. We could do it. We could have our entertainment, our low level entertainment, but then we're going to elevate back to what the real thing is.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting around having dinner with each other, talking, playing a board game, having a conversation, a couple hugs, taking a walk.
Gives them
That stuff
fresh
is
air, yeah.
super duper important, man.
Yeah, because it also speeds up your brain. So it studies have shown that being on social media a lot, it speeds up your brain activity so that your attention is more scattered. So now it makes it harder for you to focus, harder for you to direct your attention. So it takes away from your ability to produce when you need to, and it makes it harder for you to regulate your emotions because you need continual stimulus, because it puts your brain in a pattern of looking for that repeated dopamine hit. As a matter of fact, I think if I remember my studies correctly, the type of dopamine release that happens during social media isn't as consistent as, like, working out. You actually require more. You require more because the dopamine doesn't last as long, so you have to keep on getting high. You have to keep on getting high, like you said. And
Because then you get the serotonin that comes in right behind that, and then you start feeling depressed.
mm-hmm.
Right? And that's why the drug analogies are always there, because when you get high and you get the dopamine, and then the reverb back and the serotonin levels start dropping, and then you're just stuck, and then you're in that vicious cycle. So
What about as a black man? What are you learning about being a black man right now?
well, I mean, this is a great time to kind of go back and read and study and understand things. Like if you haven't watched documentaries like, you know, 13
Mm-hmm.
or Loving, or going back and really understanding some of our past leaders. Like we all know the names of like James Baldwin or Thurgood Marshall, but like, what do you know about those folks? Like, it's a good time to kind of read those books right now, study people a little bit more.
You
I'm just learning. Sorry, go ahead.
what about you individually as a black man? I know you're talking about, yeah.
That's where I'm getting to. And I'm just saying, like, what I'm understanding as a black man is, you know, I'm not as isolated of an individual as I would like to believe, or I've maybe even convinced myself over the years. I'm a community person. We're interconnected as a people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's what I'm learning as a black man, right? And I'm also learning that I get to define my identity, right? My identity isn't defined by other people. In that right now, we're on the forefront of a thing that has never happened, and I oftentimes like to fast forward and then have the luxury of looking back. So if you think about 100 years from now, and people were talking about 2020, all they're going to talk about is coronavirus, COVID-19. You fast forward a couple hundred years from now, it's probably as good of an opportunity to define and start redefining blackness and black male identity, because in my black male identity, right, I want to reemphasize that whole kind of being open to making connections with people and elevating my identity to more on a humanity level, right? I told you my people, right? Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Bishop Desmond Tutu. I told you, like, elevating on that humanity level is my work. I'm not, you can't just be defined, and this is controversial and we could probably debate this forever. I think it's a little bit expired, our definition, defining ourselves by geography, defining ourselves by a physical geography. Like, this is my neighborhood, this is my city, this is my state. Like, that was a real identity, part of the black identity for a long time. And then they attacked us on that level with things like redlining and gentrification. We got outtakes like food deserts and all this other kind of stuff. But the world is moving real fast, and you can't really define yourself by a physical location anymore. Now that physical location is being attacked even more because of coronavirus, right? But you and I can have this conversation, which is real uplifting and nourishing, and we're doing it in a cyber environment. Like, we can be global creatures. We can be global creatures as Black Americans. That's what I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to see myself as a global citizen, not just, I grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut. It was real, how you defined yourself was by the neighborhood you grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know that,
Mm-hmm.
right? I don't know. I mean, you got 10,000 Black listeners out there, they all gonna shake their head and identify with that. You from a city, I don't care how small it is, you go down into your neighborhood. I live in Portland, Oregon now, been for about 15 years. Northeast Portland, Albina, Vanport, flooding, all that is core identity stuff. But in the decades to come, I believe we got to be more global citizens so we can be. It's just the physicality, the physical limitations are being imposed upon us.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't know where this quarantine stuff is going to be in a year or two. So we have to be more global. We have to be more of a global citizenry. And I wish we were, so we could connect more with, Africans, Middle Easterns, people from India, South America, Central America, the Caribbean. When you start talking about Black identity, man, there's a whole nother hour to talk about, how our identity has been so attacked that we defined our identity by a zip code, and we cut out Native Americans, and we cut out Latino Americans, Latinx, we cut out Middle East, we cut out Africa, we cut out South America. We don't understand how, go back and look at the slavery thing. And you don't understand how our bloodlines are so interwoven that setting up boundaries between them is just idiotic. It is just utterly idiotic, and it has limited our growth and our development beyond words. And so understanding our relationship with Native American tribes, we got that in our bloodline. Latin America, we got that in our bloodline. They got African in their bloodline. When slaves left Africa, they didn't just go to Florida. They didn't just go to Virginia. They went to South America. They went to Cuba. They went to Jamaica. They went to all parts of the globe with Africans. And then here we are today being defined by a zip code and then fighting with people that's of another zip code. So I want to be a global citizen, and I want to align with people, with our people on a global level. And this, anyway, I don't know what the outtake of that is and where that lands and how that goes, but we start seeing ourselves as global citizens, we got a better shot when it comes to those people that are our natural sworn enemies. We got them. We got natural sworn enemies out there. You don't believe that right wing. I'm not talking about right wing politics. I'm talking about right wing, neo-Nazi, white supremacists. That's our natural enemy. We can't be looking at Mexicans and people in the Sioux tribe and people from South America as distant, unknown people when they're more our relatives in the bloodline. I mean, it's hard enough for you and I to connect. You know, you from Southeast Portland, I'm from Northeast Portland, or you from Oakland and I'm from Brooklyn. So anyway, I'm on a rant, but that's kind of what you know, if I go deep, that's kind of what's on my mind right now.
And then what can you give? What can you give professionals of color, high performing professionals of color? What advice can you give them as they're wanting to promote, reposition in their careers, in their lives? What are some things that you can give from your HR background um, that can kind of help them?
I think you got to study the corporate game. I think there is a game, there is a playbook that's out there. You could study it, whether it's corporate or nonprofit or state, government, federal. There's a lot of rules to it, a lot of similarities across those various industries. I think you should know it. I think you should try to learn it. And I think you should study it with like-minded people and mentors, and then understand how you can be your authentic self in that space should you choose to play in that game,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're going to go start your own business and you don't have to play in that game quite as much, so be it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to go into the corporate world and you're going to be a lawyer, an accountant, or a admin professional, or IT person, or something like that, nurse, doctor, vet tech, you just got to learn the game and make a decision about how deeply you want to play in it without sacrificing your identity
Mm.
and your morals and your ethics. And that's, you know, in your identity. I said your moral identity, but your racial identity too, because I know that's a big part of this conversation, is how to be in that space without sacrificing your racial identity,
Mm-hmm.
still being successful. It is a process. It is a process that you have to learn, but you cannot do it without learning the environment that you're trying to succeed in. You do have to study that environment, which means you got to study those people.
Mm-hmm.
You got to study the people in their ways, and you got to study you and your ways and figure out what the sweet spot is,
Mm-hmm.
because there is one.
Yeah, and I talk about that is awareness of self, culture, and the social environment around you, and that's what we teach here at Emanuel Solomon Training and Coaching is cultural emotional intelligence, which expands on awareness, not just self-awareness like uh, typical self, not just self-awareness like typical emotional intelligence teachings. We talk about awareness as a whole, which is awareness of self, of culture, and the social environment around you. So how that is impacting you, how that's affecting you. If you don't understand that, you can't really understand self. And I always felt like You can't understand self without understanding culture. So what you're saying is, at least for me, it's spot on. Is that awareness level? I think is where it starts. And finally, man, how can we support you? Like what causes? Where can we find you at? How can people support um, your journey? I mean, you're an HR professional, so you might need some folks to hire, but you also might need some. Uh, how can we help you? How can we support you?
Well, what I'm not about to do is give you my Instagram or my Twitter.
And now,
After all that I just got through
all that
saying.
media stuff, you basically, if you do even have a Instagram, it should be banned right now.
It should be Ben. They should take me down right now. I probably got the same cell phone number for the last 15 years. I do have a LinkedIn. It's a good way to connect professionally on LinkedIn. Sean Woodard at, well, it's probably not at anything, but I work for MESD.
Okay.
Good way to connect there. You know, there's always things to learn, man. There's always things to learn about the career, the technical pieces of the career. It's always fast moving. The laws change with the administration at the highest level. You know, with this president that we have, a lot of laws have changed.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully there will be a new president. I don't mind saying that. Hopefully
Right.
there'll be a new president. The laws will change. There's always things to learn. There's always things to learn on an interpersonal level. Things that I can learn about myself. If people want to connect, they can just hit me up. Love to sit down and, well, we can't really have in-person coffee right now, but you know, we can chat on
Zoom meeting.
we could Zoom all day long and just chat and reflect. I love to connect with people. If I had more people of color in my organization, that would be a win at all levels. I got entry level positions up to leadership positions. You know, if people are interested in that space, they should hit me up and consider me a inside connection. I do not promise jobs, but I can promise opportunity and doorway and conversation and connection and things like that.
So they
So
go to LinkedIn, Sean Woodard.
yeah, that's the best way to do it.
Okay.
So
Man, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us, man, and taking time out of your day to really help high performing professionals of color to promote and reposition. This is the People Man Talks podcast. I'm your host, Emanuel Solomon, the People Man, and I'm out.